right, so welcome to Arkansas Food Freedom Act. Today's panelist is Jeff Jackson. Jeff is or has been employed by the Arkansas Department of Health since 2006, where he currently serves as the standardization training officer for the retail food program. In this position, he is responsible for training and standardization of all retail food staff in the state, as well as working to ensure conformance with the National Voluntary Retail Food Program standards. He received his Bachelor's of Science in Education with an emphasis in biology from Arkansas State University in 2005, and a bachelorette certificate in public health from the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences in 2013. He was selected to cohort 5 of the National Environmental Public Health Leadership Institute and was the 2017 recipient of the Mid-Continental Association of Food and Drug Officials Achievement Award. So go ahead and take it away, Jeff.
Thank you, Dimitri, and welcome to everyone who's here with us this afternoon. I've looked through the attendee list briefly, and I saw a few names there that I recognize. So for those of you who don't know me, as he said, my name is Jeff Jackson, and for all intents and purposes, I'm kind of on tour for the Homemade Food Guide and what that means to y'all. So if you're a member of several organizations, you're probably going to see several presentations from me on this topic. But we'll go ahead and jump right in and get started. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of homemade food sales in Arkansas. As most are aware, prior to 2009, there really wasn't any way that people could sell food that they produce in their home to the public. It was completely prohibited. However, in 2009, we did get the Cottage Food Act, and originally it allowed the sales of bakery products, candy, fruit butters, jams, jellies, direct to the consumer from the home that they were produced, or they could be sold at a physical farmer's market, a county fair, or a special event. It was amended several times over the years to include uncut chocolate-covered fruits and berries, and online farmers market sales, as well as sales at pop-up shops within another established business. And then in 2021, there was actually 2 acts passed. Act 306 was passed that allowed internet sales and delivery by mail. However, it was superseded by the Food Freedom Act in that same session. So we'll jump right into that. So in 2021, Act 1040 of the General Session was passed. It allows the sale of any non-time temperature control for safety food to an informed end consumer, and it expands on the locations and the methods of which these can be sold. So I provided a link in this presentation to the actual act if you'd like to look it up. And these slides will be available after the presentation is completed. So let's jump right in. Food Freedom Act. What is TCS food, right? So if we got to know what non-TCS food is, we have to define what TCS food is. So TCS food is food, in short, it's food that requires temperature control for safety. So it's things that have to be refrigerated to keep bacteria from growing in that product. And these foods include animal foods, which include meat, poultry, seafood, dairy, and it's irregardless of whether those products are raw or whether they've been heat treated. If you see the word heat treated, that just means cooked, okay? And then it also includes food of plant origin that has been heat treated or consists of raw seed sprouts, cut melons, cut leafy greens, cut tomatoes, garlic and oil mixtures, and any food that because of its water activity and pH, and I've underlined those words because we're going to define those in just a minute, is designated as product assessment required in table A or B of that definition. So we talked about water activity. Bacteria require several things to grow. If you remember back to high school or college biology, you might have heard the phrase fat Tom. So they require food, acidity, time, temperature, oxygen or lack of, and moisture, okay? So really water activity is looking at the moisture component of this. So if you can control the water activity of a food, then you can prevent bacteria growth in that food. So water activity is really just a way to measure the amount of water that's available for bacteria to use during their growth cycle. It's not how wet the product is, but it's how much water is allowed, is there for them to use. And it has a range of 0 to 1. A product with water activity of 1 would have 100% of its water available for bacteria to use. And then we talk about pH. pH, again, is the measure of how acidic or basic a substance is. Everyone remembers that from from high school or college. And so you have some common foods. So lemon juice, for example, has a pH of about 2, whereas coffee's about 5, and then water, blood, those type things are in the 6 to 7 range, right? And then of course bleach and drain cleaner and things on the opposite end of that scale, and they're very basic products. So in order to prevent bacteria growth, we're looking at controlling either water activity or pH to determine whether a product is TCS food or not. And I won't go into a lot of detail on this because I don't want to confuse a lot of people, but I did want to put out just some bare minimum information. So it referenced the interaction tables, Table A and Table B. I won't spend a lot of time on these again, but I do want to highlight one thing. So the Table A is for food that's heat treated and subsequently packaged. So this would include things like pickles and things like that, right? So you're cooking them in a water bath, and then you're packaging them into jars. So that's where this would fall. So we can look at these water activity values, and you can see that for any water activity value, as long as that pH is below 4.6, then it's a non-TCS product. And that's going to come into play here in just a minute whenever I explain some things. But I wanted to kind of talk to you about where these rules are and kind of how they come together. So the Food Freedom Act defines non-TCS foods as foods that do not require time or temperature control for safety to limit pathogenic growth, micro or toxin formation as defined in the rules of the Department of Health. So those Table A and Table B are used in the rules of the Department of Health. So if your product does not fall within one of the parameters, then we will refer back to Table A or Table B to determine whether it's a TCS food or not. An informed end consumer, what is that? So according to the Act, an informed end consumer is a person who last purchased the homemade product. They cannot resell the product, and they've been informed that the product is not regulated, inspected, certified, or made in a facility that is state licensed, permitted, inspected, or regulated. And every product under this Act has to contain specific labeling and disclosures as required by that law. So it has to be labeled with the name, the address, and the telephone number of the producer. If you do not wish to put that kind of information out on your products for privacy concerns, then you do have an option that you can contact the Department of Agriculture, and they will provide you with an ID number that you can put on your label instead of the name, address, and telephone number. You also have to include the common or usual name of the food and your ingredients in descending order of predominance. So whatever has the most weight or volume in the product has to be listed first. Whatever has the second most weight or volume has to be listed second, and so on and so forth. And you also have to provide a disclosure statement that says that this product was produced in a private residence that is exempt from state licensing and inspection. This product may contain allergens. So this statement is required by the law, so it has to be word for word what it says there on your products. So the disclosure and labeling information has to be provided on the package, or if the product is not packaged and it's offered from a bulk container like I don't know, cupcakes in a display case at a farmer's market or something like that, then it has to be on the container that they're housed in, and a separate document that contains all that labeling information, and the disclosure statement has to be provided to the customer at the time of sale. For products that are sold online, your website has to include that labeling and disclosure information, and the package will also have to be labeled with that information as well. So here's some examples of what a label would look like. You'll see here we have grape jelly. That's the common name of the product. It's produced by J&K Farms, which is John and Kelly Jones at 123 Sesame Street, and there's their phone number. Well, then we have the ingredients. Sugar is our most predominant ingredient, so it's listed first, grape juice, and then pectin. And then we have our statement. This product was produced in a private residence. And then we also have the manufacturer date, so that has to be included on there as well. I also have a copy of a label that would be using the Department of Ag exemption. So if you see here, instead of the name, address, and phone number, we do have that this is, their identification number is 123456, and the rest of the label is exactly the same. So sales, how can we sell these products? Your products have to be sold directly to the consumer. Transactions can be in person, by telephone, or online. So there's not a lot of restrictions on how you can sell them. And delivery can be in person, either from a retail space that you keep at your farm or your office or your home where you're producing the product, or they can be delivered by the producer, or the producer can have an agent or an employee deliver the product. You can also use a third-party vendor or a retail or grocery store to vend your or to sell your product. If you go this route, you do need to know a couple things. One, you have to keep your product separate from any food that's inspected. So it has to be on a separate shelf space. It has to have the disclosure requirements posted and all that stuff at the time of sale. And it also has to be, it cannot be sold to a restaurant for them to use in the restaurant, but you can have it at a restaurant for sale if they have a separate retail space available. I do also want to mention that if you sell to a third-party vendor, then you need to understand that a lot of these grocery stores will probably tell you no for several reasons. One, that shelf space is important to them, and you would have to move a extremely large amount of product to get on the shelf. The other issue is they're still liable for any products that they sell that cause illness. So there's strict liability laws when it comes to food safety, and so some retailers, particularly larger retailers, may not be willing to take that on. So I would encourage you to reach out to them and try to market your product any way that's legal, but do be prepared that they may not allow that. Also, you can deliver the products using a third-party carrier, so you can send them through the mail or parcel post or a courier or how have you. And the transactions may occur in Arkansas, or they can occur in another state if the seller complies with all applicable federal laws. So our rules or our laws only apply to citizens of Arkansas and foods while they're in the state of Arkansas. If they leave the state of Arkansas and they go to another state, then they may be under federal jurisdiction, or they may be under the jurisdiction of the receiving state or the receiving county, depending on how they've set up their food safety program. So if I was a Food Freedom Act operator, I would make sure that I contacted all the appropriate authorities before I sent my product out of state or any other method like that. So prohibited foods, let's talk first about the things we can't do, and then we'll talk about the things that we can, which is really what y'all are concerned about, I think. So of course, prohibited foods are any product that contains meat, poultry, seafood, or dairy. You can put butter as an ingredient in a baked good, and that's okay, but it can't be a dairy product that's still an active dairy product in that product that's identifiable after you've cooked it. Cut tomatoes or cut leafy greens, those are in the definition, but I did want to include them again because I wanted to define what cut leafy greens are. Cut leafy greens do not include greens that have been cut from the root in the field. So the harvest cut only. If they're cut, torn, shredded, or otherwise processed, then they would be considered cut leafy greens and would be prohibited under this act. Garlic and oil mixtures are TCS foods and are prohibited. Any food of plant origin that is heat treated, with an exception for pickles and acidified vegetables because they are listed specifically in the act. Seed sprouts, These do not include microgreens, but the definition of microgreens are sprouted seeds that are harvested after the emergence of true leaves, and they are allowed under food freedom, provided that only that harvest cut is used on them. If you have sprouted seeds with intact roots, or their cotyledons are still or underdeveloped, then they're considered sprouts and they would be prohibited. We also would prohibit low acid canned foods, and what that term is referring to is the food itself. So the green beans or the corn itself has a very high pH, and so it's not considered an acid food. And so if you're canning low acid foods, you're typically using a water bath canner, a pressure canner. And so anything that you would have to pressure can for safety would be a low acid canned food and couldn't be used. Again, I do want to reference that some of these slides contain examples, and they're not meant to be an all-inclusive list. Other foods that are considered TCS would be dairy products like butter, sour cream, and cheese, deli salads. They would include potato salad, coleslaw, pimento cheese, casseroles and meals, quiches, spaghetti casserole, squash casserole, and then any food that requires refrigeration, such as tiramisu, cream or custard pies, and cheesecakes. Now let's talk about what we can sell. So you can sell any of the foods that you were previously allowed to sell under the Cottage Food Act. And then you can also now sell dried, dehydrated, and roasted products, including baking mixes, dry beans, dried fruits, and dried herbs and seasonings or soup mixes. As long as those products are dry, then you can sell those. You can also sell icings and things, buttercream, gum paste, fondant, and then acid and acidified foods. So these are things like canned fruits that have a pH below 4.6, canned salsas and tomato sauce that has a pH below 4.6, pickled products, cucumbers or beets or okra with a pH that's below 4.6. So you see this 4.6 coming up, and that's why I wanted to bring that up in the earlier slides, is the 4.6 is the critical point for making sure that this is a safe product. We can also do condiments like barbecue sauce, ketchup, salsa, and stuff, as long as it has a pH below 4.6. So there are some special requirements for acid and acidified foods. First off, you have to use a recipe that's approved by the Department of Health, or there's some other processes. But before I go on to the ors, I want to mention that if you look at the Food Freedom Act guideline, or it's actually the Homemade Food Production Guideline that's on our website, and I'll provide a link to that here in just a few minutes. But if you look through that, there will be a link on each one of these food items that gives a recipe. That is the recipes that are approved by ADH. So if you don't use those recipes, then you have to take one of these other options. The first option would be to process the product, or the product or process can be confirmed by a process authority, which is a scientist who will look at your product and make a determination on whether your product meets the definition of non-TCS or not. Or the producer has to test each batch with a calibrated pH meter to confirm that that product has a pH value that's below 4.6. And each product has to be labeled with a unique number for each batch, or put a batch number on it. The producer also has to maintain records that include the batch number, the recipe that was used, the source of the recipe that they used, or the pH of the batch as measured by the producer, and the date that you prepared that batch. That all has to be included in records that you maintain at the site of production. Should you be out selling your product somewhere and the Department of Health asks you to see your records, you will need to provide those records so that we can ensure that you're in compliance with the law. So in summary, all foods that are produced under the Food Freedom Act must be produced in a home kitchen. They can't be produced at somewhere besides your home. They have to be labeled with the name, address, and phone number, or the ID number that's provided by the Department of Agriculture. They have to be labeled with the date that they were produced and their ingredients in descending order. and they have to be labeled with the statement, "This product was produced in a private residence that is exempt from state licensing and inspection. This product may contain allergens." And they can be sold at farmers markets, they can be sold at grocery stores or other retail stores, sold from the home, the ranch, or the farm where they're produced. You can sell them via the internet, or you can ship them using a commercial carrier. They cannot be sold to someone other than the end consumer, and they cannot be sold for use in restaurants. This is the Food Freedom Act guideline. I've provided the link there. I will also try to send you a copy of this link through the chat if I can figure out how to use this version of a presentation system. But other than that, I am through. And Dimitri, if you have any questions that you've received, I'll be glad to take them. Please write my information down and contact me if you have any questions at all. And I thank y'all for your time.
All right, thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing that information. I am going to just allow some time to let anyone who may have some questions that they didn't get a clear answer to, or maybe they need elaboration on, to go ahead and type it in the question pane now, and we can get those questions answered for you. So we do have one question from John. He said, can the batch number be a production date, for example, 82521?
Yes, you can do that. What most manufacturing facility, it would need to be separate. So like if you're already required to put the manufacturer date on there, but I would put it on there twice because you've got to have both. And what a lot of people do is use a Roman calendar. And so what that means is January the 1st would be 0001, January the 2nd would be 0002, and then December 31st would be 0365. So that's how they're basing that, and then you would put the year in front of that. So, you know, for this year, January 1st of this year would be recorded as 2101. And that's how I would do my batch numbers, just to keep it straight. But, you know, if you wanted to put 210825 as your batch number, you could do that, but you would also have to